Today in the EU eyes Georgia amid election fraud allegations. Last weekend's parliamentary election in Georgia has sparked significant controversy amid allegations of electoral manipulation before and during polling day. Key concerns include supposed vote buying targeting vulnerable groups, misuse of administrative power, and possible tampering with new electronic voting systems. Accusations suggest the ruling Georgian Dream party used voter intimidation and criminal networks to sway results. Despite pre-election opinion and exit polls indicating different outcomes, Georgian Dream claimed a decisive victory, prompting opposition parties, the president and the public to question the legitimacy of the results. With international observers noting irregularities and EU officials calling for investigations, the situation underscores a serious challenge for Georgia's democratic future and its EU integration ambitions. Hello and welcome. I am Evi Chiori, and this is Today in the EU. To look into the aftermath of the elections, I spoke with Dr. Tinatin Ahvlediani, Research Fellow in the EU Foreign Policy Unit at SEPS. Tina, welcome back to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here again.
Today we are talking about the aftermath of the Georgian parliamentary election. There have been lots of reports coming from the country, not only about the election results, but the election process itself. What is the situation internally as we speak?
This is a very good question because in Georgia, for the past years, for the past elections, we already knew and there was expectation that the elections would be rigged well before the election day. But this time it was rigging the elections well before the election day, as well as during the election day. And I think in this context, it's very good to actually see and go a little bit back and pinpoint several facts that we saw how GD, the current ruling party, Georgian Dream, has actually entered the election race. So what we saw into the period in the run-up to the parliamentary elections, that they've engaged in the vote buying practices. This is not new. They've done that in the other elections as well. This time they've targeted the poor, the most vulnerable, through the directly vote buying schemes. But they also targeted the criminals. Well, basically, the Georgian Dream has adopted a bill, amnesty bill, in an extraordinary session in the parliament, which allowed GD to actually release thousands of prisoners. And these criminal networks have allegedly been used during the election day and before the election, actually, to threaten the voters and manipulate the elections. There are also precedents when the Georgian Dream has also gifted the agricultural lands and the buildings to the Georgian Church, Georgian Orthodox Church, which is very much linked to the Russian Orthodox Church and has a lot of influence to people simply because people follows and listens to what church says. And of course, their core card, which is abusing of all administrative powers they have. They have been threatening civil servants, their family members, and they have been basically harvesting all the personal information through all the public sector, including schools. So the pupils would be asked to, for instance, to bring the personal information of their parents. The situation was that bad. And of course, this has created the overall atmosphere of fear, frustration, and this is the situation how Georgia went to the election day. Now, on the election day, the very important fact is that this year, over 90% of the votes within the country have been casted electronically. This happened for the first time in Georgia. That means the Georgian Dream had also, in a way, this opportunity to do some election scheme potentially that has never been used before, because this has never been done. I mean, electronic voting has never been done in Georgia before. And so there is potential. The chances are they've also used technology to actually rig election days on the election day without leaving much trace and evidence. So there is no direct evidence on it I can quote, but chances are they would also do this. So this is basically, in a nutshell, the context of the election in Georgia.
This election cannot be recognized because it is the recognition of Russia's intrusion here, Georgia's subordination to Russia, said the President President Zurab after the Georgian Dream claimed the victory. Now, what led President Zurab to reject the Georgian election results, and why did she call for public protests?
In the run-up to the elections, she's mentioned that together with all the vote buying practices, administrative abuse of the resources, all the public threats, GD could inflate its votes up to the 40%. That was measured election fraud in a way and anticipation expectation. But what happened on the election day, they went farther up to the 54%, which very much diverges from the public opinion polls before election day, but also exit polls estimates on the election day. Usually those exit polls, Edison research, is quite precise. So 13% difference is very, very high. And because of this, obviously, and because of all the irregularities before the election, during election day, as also observed and noted in the reports of the international observation missions, President Zurab joined the opposition parties for not recognizing the elections.
This is an attempt not to steal the results of one party's support, but this is an attempt to steal Georgia's European future.
Mentioned Tina Bokushava, head of the opposition United National Movement Party.
And calling the public protests because Georgian people have really fought quite a lot over the past year with a lot of public rallies, peaceful demonstrations against all the legislative work the Georgian Dream has been doing. But also this year, the turnout was quite high for Georgia within the country as well as abroad. So diaspora has also voted. So everybody, Georgian citizens have been very much engaged. And so if there was no reaction about these rigged elections from the opposition parties, from the president, it means, people's votes have been simply taken away. Their voices have been taken away. So president wants to make sure that, she and opposition parties stand for people's true voice. And so this public demonstration, actually today, as we record this podcast, will very much show that Georgian people do not also recognize rigging elections.
How did vote monitors and opposition parties respond to the election results? And you mentioned the irregularities. So what specific irregularities did they report?
So the opposition parties have reported several threats, violent atmosphere during the elections, but also before the elections. The ballots that have been physically put into the ballot boxes during the election day. This is not new. It has been observed in the past. And of course, the potential of using technology to rigging this time the elections through electronic voting. Therefore, they have refused their mandates because most of the opposition parties, actually all of them, which are pro-Western, they have all passed the threshold of the 5%. So they all won the mandates. Their message is that they won the mandates, however, they're refusing it because the mandates do not correspond to what should be the true number of mandates they would have won if the elections were free and fair. So this is why they have refused recognizing elections, which means they will boycott the new parliament, because with the 89 mandates that the Georgian Dream has now won, Georgian Dream can actually start the new parliament all by itself. And we already know the opposition parties will simply not join the parliament.
And why are the election results seen as a setback for pro-Western Georgians? And what does this mean for Georgia's future EU aspirations?
It's a big setback because we could see how much Georgian Dream has backtracked the country on democratic reforms, on the reforms that are conditioned and attached to Georgians' candidate status. And Georgia has been, has been given the first 12 conditions, then 9 conditions for its European integration, for its candidacy. And these conditions have not been fulfilled. In fact, all the legislative work that Georgian Dream has been putting forward, all their statements are very much contradicting those 9 conditions. So there is expectations that if they stay in the power for the next 4 years, of course, the country will only depart from European path, will only be derailed from the European path, and will come closer to the Soviet-style, Kremlin-style terror authoritarian regime, which is definitely not in line with European values and democratic principles based on which European values stand. So if Georgia becomes authoritarian state, it will surely not have future in the European Union.
What is the EU stance on the reported election violations, and how are EU leaders urging Georgia to address these concerns?
Now, what we have seen in the statements by Charles Michel, by Josep Borrell, jointly with the European Commission so far, they have noted all the irregularities observed during the election, which is of course promising, and they have urged investigations. Although this is just my comment that as an expert, I'm speaking here from the expert's hat, is that If the EU institutions are asking Georgian institutions to investigate, this is waste because Georgian institutions have already allowed rigging elections well before election day, during election day, and it's not going to happen. They have to keep urging investigations to the international observation missions and local watchdogs because Georgian institutions will not simply do that. They're pocketed by the oligarch and the Georgian Dream in the country. Another thing is that the expectation is that you should not recognize the legitimacy of the elections, because if legitimacy is granted, then this is all the Georgian Dream wanted, right? To have legitimacy to then do all the anti-democratic, anti-EU work in the country.
And what were the first reactions of EU leaders to the results? We know that the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban congratulated the Georgian Dream, and he is visiting Georgia, actually. Why is this the case? Is there a specific message he is trying to convey?
Here, what has to be noted, Hungary, which holds the rotating EU Council presidency, obviously stands in the way of the EU's common joint response that actually makes sense for the Union, because Orban has already is on the way to Tbilisi in a way to congratulate Georgian Dream the victory in person, because he has already done that even before the final results would be published. He's already congratulated Georgian Dream the victory. We've seen this on the election day. So Orban has been, and Hungary has been very much lending legitimacy to the elections, and this goes, of course, against the EU position. Orban wants to legitimize the elections. This is the message, because Orban knows EU international community are now casting a lot of doubts and raising a lot of questions about legitimacy. So he wants to do this first mover advantage in a way and to call the elections legitimate.
And Tina, as a Georgian who lives abroad, what sentiment does this situation bring up to you?
Personally, it's been very, very difficult past week, frankly, because Georgian Dream has been in power for 3 consecutive terms. This is the 4th one. And of course, I mean, as an expert and as a citizen following all the situations in Georgia, in my country, I knew that they would not give up the power so easily. So expectation was for something that is coming up. And it's been quite difficult days, frankly, as a Georgian citizen. But of course, working in the civil society sector, where I have my freedom of speech and I can openly criticize the policies, I can openly criticize the developments, I can write, I can speak to you, and of course, I can write a lot about it. This has been a little bit helpful to basically, spread away and here make my voice heard, which brings me to better condition in a way, or more privileged condition, because all I'm thinking about are those citizens who've traveled so much, particularly diaspora groups who traveled so much just to cast that one vote. So many people who are frustrated today, who are even depressed, or who have lost the hope that their fight does not have any result. I just want to tell them that everything has result. All the fight is obviously worthwhile, and let's just make our voices heard.
Thank you very much, Tina. I am Evi Chiori, and this was Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. You can get in touch with us by leaving a comment or review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work, but also understand what topics you like listening to. This episode was produced by Miriam Sainz Tejada, Charles Cohen, and me. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back on Monday morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.